We are here to present our work on the design
My name is Joy. I'm a technical officer
Sorry,
management science.
very nice.
Virginia.
We're just taking introduction, so everyone.
Yes, I'm now doing a father, finally a PhD student, and a medical research institute. And my last about a new smart state criteria decision analysis.
Madam, do you want to introduce yourself?
Oh, yes. So I'm Dr. Mariam Pada. I'm an assistant professor at Al Khan University, Karachi, Pakistan. And I've been involved in this project with these guys since 4 or 5 years now for the development of universal health development.
So I wasn't expecting anyone to be online, but I don't know. Can you see if there's anyone online? Do I need to speak from a mic?
Probably do.
Is there anyone online?
I don't see at the moment.
Okay, well then, can I just have a quick show of hands? Who has been to any of the HTA workshops that have happened yesterday, this morning?
Sorry, there is some people online.
Okay.
Just all the day.
And when it comes to HTA, who's got some familiarity with it? Absolutely, that's a comfortable yes. So moving forward, I'm going to hand it over to Bob. Oh, sure. Okay, so the program we're following today is firstly using EDPs, and that's evidence deliberative principles, processes for benefit package design. And then we will start to look at an exercise for Pakistan trying to set a benefit package there. We will think, in order to do that, we will ask you to think about what decision criteria to use, and also talk about what decision criteria is. Then we'll have a short tea break, and hopefully you can still continue to think about some of these concepts and chat to your group members that you'll be working with. And then we'll do an exercise on the appraisal. And basically that'll mean you've got a number of health technologies to think about and coming to actually deciding which ones you should be including in your benefits package. And then finally go ask the groups to then present their results and have a bit of a discussion in terms of how you come to those results and what made you choose the health ones that are in your package. Okay. Yeah.
Great, thanks, Gavin. So let's move on to the first lecture, so to say, this workshop. Which basically on EDPs, and I want to start with this cartoon. It's a cartoon we developed in our team some 2 years ago, and it reflects our thinking. And basically, I found myself for 15 years at this left-hand panel of the cartoon, working at the research department, basically developing reports, number crunching, and tossing it across the wall, hoping there would be somebody to pick it up, and hoping it would have an impact on policy. You see, combining panel is the policy department. But what I observed after working 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, we get policy departments. It's not always well organized. And it's not to blame these people. It's a common, I think, a common misunderstanding how research is best organized, and also how policy is best organized. I remember one trip when I was working at WHO headquarters. We developed a root choice database on cost effectiveness of many interventions, and I thought this is the answer to everything. We solved it, the puzzle had been done. Then we went to Ghana, the Ministry of Health, And we said like, okay, these are the results on HTA. This is the rank order of services. And what you do, you start implementing a top one. There's the lowest cost effectiveness ratio. And then you go to the next one, to the next one. And at the end, you find three for HTA. But it doesn't have good cost effectiveness ratio. So maybe you shouldn't do this. What do you think the reaction would be? Was from the Ministry of Health in Ghana? They didn't like it. They said, you're venture economist, you do your work, but that's only part of the story. Because for ethical reasons, we cannot forego on the HIV treatment. So only doing the cost effectiveness is not good enough. And so that was part of my puzzle. So how to improve the research so that it's feasible, that it's usable for policymaking. So this is more or less the classical health economics HTA with a strong focus on assessment, if you wish. I think you're all familiar with HTA. Health economic assessment, more or less. It has a strong focus on assessment. And what we try to do with the EDPs, with evidence informed deliberative processes, if we look across the board and we look at how to better organize the interaction or the decision-making process, so it's a better uptake of those results from the research. Right? So that's in a nutshell. Also the gist of the workshop. So I'm going to talk about 3 things the next 50 minutes. Let's start with universal health coverage, the benefit factor time. You've all seen this cube. Just to emphasize, with the available funds, a government can take and make 3 choices. Which service will provide? This is getting most attention in HTA, but it also refers to the question at what coverage and what level of co-payment. So often forgotten is often forecast HTA or benefit factor time is on the type of services, but it's also about coverage and also about co-payment levels. So the health benefit package, it's a package of health services from the country. Some countries have implicit packages, which can be defined as a kind of ill-defined interventions or services. And there are issues of affordability, because often you find a package which is having a long list, and it may lead to underfunding, low quality of care, and low coverage. One would aim for explicit packages which are better defined and are well costed. So basically, the budget impacts corresponds with available budget. Right? And it's all about making difficult choices. Should service A or B be funded? Spending on renal replacement therapy cannot be HIV control. And it's all there to you. It's not a cartoon I like a lot. Here you see the Minister of Health having this long list of services in front of him, scratching his head, like, where do I, what do I fund, what do I not fund? And here you see the lady with the sitter, basically reflecting the HTA, health economics community, asking, shall I help you with setting the systems? But that's basically what we are up to today. It's about how to best define the benefit package, and that's Gavin said with an application to Pakistan. Then we come to EDPs. EDPs are developed in recognition of the benefit package design is complex and it's a political process. Right, so it's not like in a left-hand panel of my first cartoon. And it's just a matter of number crunching. It's complex and a political process. Complex, because traditional focus is on a standpoint, but its reality is a process with many stakeholders involved and many steps. It's about communication, it's about transparency, it's about governance, but there's still little practical guidance on this process. Secondly, it is very critical, but it does involve various stakeholders with very different interests, often conflicting interests, like the medical professionals want to have access to the latest technologies. On the other hand, the public doesn't want to pay too much for the package. And the background is the idea that democratic governments aim to optimize legitimacy, which can be considered as the fairness of benefit package design, benefit package decisions as perceived by stakeholders. And the ethicist Norman Daniels says the ideal situation is if you have well-informed citizens, they respect a decision, they accept a decision, even if the decision is taken against their interests. But if people are well-informed, they see the need for decisions that are taken, even if it goes against their own interests. So the overall aim in the context of a democratic government is to optimize legitimacy, optimize fairness. Many of you will know the A4R framework from Norman Daniels. He set conditions, development conditions, conditions, but it's not very critical, those who work in it. So what we do in the EDPs is basically operationalizing those conditions. So what does legitimacy mean in practice? Right? So EDPs improve on those two aspects. Firstly, on the complexity, we provide practical guidance on how to do all these different steps. And we provide practical guidance on the legitimacy. So EDPs can be defined as a stepwise approach to support countries in the design and innovation of the health benefit package, with an emphasis on legitimacy. So how does it look like in practice? We distinguish 6 steps, A to F. First step is installing an advisory committee, or broadly speaking, a governance structure. So who is involved in making decisions? Who is the assessment team? It's already thinking about the right-hand panel, you see? So it's not only producing evidence, it's about organizing the right-hand panel in my cartoon. Who are you talking to as researchers? Step B is defining decision criteria, like what data needs to be collected. So basically asking policymakers in the right-hand panel, what kind of evidence do you like? And decision criteria, of course, reflects norms and values of community. Again, it's going to talk more about it. C is selecting health technologies for HTA. So it's what services are you talking about? And then we go every technology on scoping, assessment, and appraisal. We can spend a bit more time on that later on. And then we have communication and appeal, monitoring, evaluation. So in this session, in this workshop, we're going to concentrate on step B, or step B3. It's going to be on what are the decision criteria that you find useful for the project in Pakistan, and how do you conduct the appraisal. We could talk about many other things on EDP, but we choose this focus for this workshop because the appraisal is often a very complex thing on itself. If you have multiple pieces of information with lots of uncertainty, you have multiple stakeholders in the room. What's going to happen in the room? How do you organize a process with the stakeholders, with the evidence, that finally people leave the room after 2 days and they're happy and they think we have taken a fair decision, and even if it does go against an interest of the stakeholder, he or she will accept it. So how to design that appraisal process. So that's a bit of focus of the day. So we're going to focus a lot on these. So the methods from EDPs are based on theories and best practices We're looking at HTA bodies around the world, Scotland, Netherlands, UK, but also Chile, Brazil, and to see, okay, what are agencies doing in those contexts, and what can be used, what could be best implemented for other countries. So the focus on legitimacy, very briefly, because it's not going to be the focus of this workshop, but we recognize the behavioral conditions from relevance and transparency of the mainly through meaningful stakeholder involvement, which means not only communication, not only communicating results with stakeholders, not only consulting stakeholders, but real participation of stakeholders. And I leave it to that. The other one, in transparency, that HTA levels should be fully transparent in the different steps that are taken. We develop a practical guide on EDPs, and we have some copies with me. Maybe you could distribute. It's the second version. First version was released in 2018. This is from last year, 2021. Very practical. It provides guidance on these different steps, and organized alongside 60 questions. So who should sit in an advisory committee? What's the length of a term of people serving as advisory committee? How do you come to a decision? It's also about decision criteria, like which decision criteria should be considered or could be considered. Like I said, emphasis on legitimacy, and we illustrated in boxes with best practices of HTA bodies worldwide. Like I said, from Brazil, from Thailand, from Germany, from France, Scotland, Canada. You don't present this as a blueprint, but as a manual of options. So if you are a governmental body, HTA body in a country, thinking about benefit package design, you can look at the guide and look, okay, what's Scotland doing in this respect? And they can really have a stakeholder involvement. So that could be a very nice example for you to use in your setting. Or how is appraisal working in the UK? Because UK NICE is basically leading in how it does appraisal. But that could be a nice inspiration for other countries to use. So these are the questions that are being addressed in the guide. I'm not going into detail, but these are the questions that people can typically ask. And we have these tables where you see, okay, how do we come to a decision? We look at Canada, with the stakeholders have voting rights. Yes, in Canada they have voting rights. All countries, stakeholders have voting rights. Do they include patient representatives? Yes, in Canada. No, in UK only public representatives. And the advice is maybe on advisory in Canada, but recommendations from NICE in UK are binding. So these are different characteristics of the HTA bodies in terms of the governance. So I hope you get the picture of the EDPs, which is basically providing practical guidance on the one hand, with a strong layer of legitimacy, right? Inspired by best practices from HTA bodies around the world. And with lots of examples. Just a brief view on what we do at the moment with the EDPs. These are the projects. These are the projects we are running. Quite a number of World Bank projects, projects for WHO, for the Gates Foundation, Kyrgyzstan, Rwanda, Pakistan, Liberia, Iran, and I'm going to mention all of them. But typically the work we do is to shape the process. So we often link up with, for example, London School of Tropical Medicine. They do the cost effectiveness analysis, costing analysis, and we basically organize the process by how do you set up an appraisal meeting, which stakeholders do they involve. Like in Rwanda, we're now thinking, about involving community representatives in the appraisal process, which is not easy, which is thinking about as a typical question that comes to our place. And together with RSB and Rwanda, that you have, it's how do you come to this approach investment. So that's the introduction on EDPs, and we're going to hand over to Maria. So we're going to look at Pakistan, and basically you provide the background. So any questions so far on EDPs? You have to take one or two questions for the question. Yes.
So, if you design like packages, you may like design full package design, or you can use like incremental approach where you just increase additional regulations and criteria. Now, where you use this EDP process, and if you design style, open design, how is like the role of this like steering group or like this team in that design, because the intervention are going to be so much and all the most of the design changing.
I really like your question because it's something we focus on very soon and cost effective in the piece of application in journal. And the question we address there should countries follow an incremental or complete package review. Basically, that's your question. It's the examples we're getting from UK, Netherlands, it's all incremental. Right? It's all about adding one single technology in with the principles. Often the same. It's about same advisory committee. It's about same level, same information about cost effectiveness. At the same time, there are important differences. Because when you need to evaluate 20 services at the same time, in your appraisal, you cannot simply display that information and hope that the appraisal committee can understand everything. So you need a more systematic approach. We come to back in a moment. Like, what do you do if you evaluate 20 or more services at the same time? That's a specific question for whole package review. Okay. Thanks.
So when I saw the list of countries and different projects that this is being applied, maybe a reflection on, and also your comment about this being a political process. Any reflection on differences in terms of applying the same principle but differently? How does it work? Because if I give the example of Rwanda, where you will find the ministry wanting for everything to be covered by the insurance, and insurance fighting back and having that discussion. How is it? What are the common features? Is it the same among low income countries, high income countries? Is it the same process? Does it take the same approach, or to which extent the process is adjusted to the political context?
Indeed, it's very political, and different countries have different political dynamics. And in Rwanda, we do work with colleges to define the cancer package. And it was quite a strong push on colleges to keep current services, including the more advanced services like MRI for diagnostics. But that's something that if you just do the number crunching, you would say that's not cost effective, that's profit. But because of less interest and because of strong, basically strong push from colleges in Rwanda, this is maintained in the package. So that's what you see in Rwanda. There's strong stakeholder interest, so you cannot simply remove services. Another country like Iran, we're looking at different disease areas, so multiple sclerosis only. But that is much easier to make changes because it's all for the benefit of our professionals working within multiple sclerosis. But that's easier to reallocate resources. But overall, I think the dimension means it's very difficult to disinvest into services that theoretically, we all think just remove the service because it's not cost effective, but in reality, hardly possible. Mariam is going to present on Pakistan. On that project, if you look at the simple benefit package we ended with, and where we started with 3 years before, it's more or less the same. And one can be cynical and say, so what's the point of doing the whole exercise? But there are two main benefits. One is, now the benefit package is fenced in a way that no further services can be supplemented, can be added to it, because it's clear what's in it. And secondly, there is huge stakeholder support for the package. So even if the package has remained the same, and say maybe in what I tested remain the same, but also these two things apply. Much better support plus it's fenced. There we go. Can I give you the floor for the next one?
Okay, so hello everyone, to those also who joined us just now. So I'll give you a brief background of how Pakistan looks like. There's no obviously participant from Pakistan, but the exercise we'll be doing on Pakistan, so you should know a little bit of the context. It's like other low and middle income countries, and it has a population of 240 million, and it has the geographic areas divided. It's a decentralized health system with 4 provinces and 3 federated areas. The life expectancy is around 66, 67 years. And the UNC index, according to 2015, was 40. And you can well imagine where it's standing. It's pretty low, with, I think, a few of the sub-Saharan Africans. And then the health system is composed of both public sector and an unregulated private sector. Most of the services are, so 70% of utilization is from the private sector, which is unregulated and sometimes not reported. According to this exercise, what we'll be doing, you have to keep in mind that we have a double, triple burden of disease. So while we are struggling with infectious diseases like TB and hepatitis, we have non-communicable diseases like diabetes, hypertension, death and cardiovascular diseases that are on the top. And then we have now adding on them are injuries and mental health issues. So all of those are, you think of the area, and that's important when you are prioritizing and you are talking about health benefit packages. So this project was DCP3, Disease Control Priorities 3, and it provides evidence on the most cost-effective interventions for low and middle income countries, and also for the middle income countries. So there was this huge community of 500 technical experts, policymakers, implementers that actually came together and they developed DCP3. And Pakistan is one of the first countries who adopted DCP3 for development of its health benefit package. And now we are in the phase of implementation of this impact of health services in Pakistan. I'll just talk a little bit about, this is the step A, which Rob was talking about, the governance structure and advisory, installing an advisory committee. So this is how it works. You will also be working like this because you will mimic somebody like you will be advocating for health benefit package and policymakers. So there were these 4 clusters which are in DCP3, the reproductive, maternal, neonatal, child, adolescent health and nutrition. That's one cluster. Then there's non-communicable diseases, communicable diseases, and health services access cluster. This one is composed of mainly the surgeries and the laboratory services. So what they do is that there were more than 100 stakeholders in all these technical working groups, and they were, doing all these EDPs, evidence-based deliberative processes, which we'll be doing today, and the 6 steps. And then they were giving recommendations to the National Advisory Committee. So the National Advisory Committee, they have, so the stakeholders, all which Rob was referring to, are the policymakers, the implementers, the clinical experts, the civil society organizations, public sector, private sector, development partners, And yes, community was not part of that, and now that DCP3 is going forward, DCP4 and or we're talking about. And then the National Advisory Committee, they provided recommendations to the steering committee, and the steering committee is headed by the Minister of Health. And side by side, they also get recommendations from the International Advisory Group, which is composed of international experts on DCP3 and the UHC Secretariat that lies within the ministry. So I will talk.
So for the exercise, which I'm going to introduce, like I said, you're going to be technical working group for one of these disease areas, and you're going to make a recommendation to the National Advisory Committee, so to say, on which services you think should be in a package for clinical disease moving forward for pharmaciation. So the instructions, like I said, a group of 4 to 5 people. We're going to apply to government of Pakistan on the inclusion of services. Each group will focus on a specific set of services. So within your group, you can choose which one to focus on. The challenge is there is not enough physical space. Well, there's not enough budget to do everything. Right? So your task is to prioritize. And what you do in your exercise, 3 things. You're going to define the decision criteria, you're going to complete the assessment based on your own judgment on the decision criteria you mentioned, and you're going to place the services. Right? We are providing you with this Excel sheet in your folder. You're not yet expected to go to this folder, which is here. Also written down there. We first have a session on decision criteria. But after the evidence gone through decision criteria, you want to look at this spreadsheet because it shows you, or this is for multiple diseases, it shows you the set of interventions. Then it shows you the cost per intervention, $1 per capita, 20 cents per capita, right? It shows you that the combined budget impact of all these is $3 per capita, which available budget is only $2. So you cannot implement all of it. Here you have information about the cost effectiveness, the quality of the evidence, the uncertainty about the cost effectiveness, and the avoidable burden of disease, which is basically the population health case. So this is the information we give you. The next question by Gavin is on adding decision criteria. Then you're expected to complete this Excel sheet with your expert judgment on the performance of those services on the decision criteria, and you are going to appraise and prioritize. Is that overall clear what you're up to? You can still run up if you like. You can need to go to the bathroom and then come back and but it's people like me, you've done this more often in summer courses, and people like to work with a real world example. And in your group, you're going to discuss this intervention more than the other one. And the very nice thing is we have Mariam here, who has gone through it in Pakistan herself. And we like the feedback on your findings, and Mariam can give very nice response to your presentation. This is no different in Pakistan, this is what you're going to say. It's in the bottom of the Excel sheet, it has all the explanations. You view on what you can expect.
And I'd be curious, like, those are taken, how is that integration taken into account? So, for example, like, the cost effectiveness of the cervical cancer screening, and then maybe some HIV treatment.
Yeah.
Can be thought of separately, but, you know, some countries, for example, want to integrate them and just adding on
Yeah.
one extra screening on top of an HIV service might be more cost effective than.
Sure. We keep it simple for now, and I propose in the discussion, when it gets complex, you ask Marianne to solve it. Yeah. Yeah. Go to the introduction and the exercise of the
Right, so just to recall, there are a number of rows and each row is a different intervention. And then there were a couple of columns from left to right, and those are your different criteria. So there was one with cost effectiveness, evidence, avoidable burden of disease, and I'll just explain those and give you a bit of an overview of criteria. Does anyone want to just give me what they think has been a definition of criteria or values? From your point of view. I mean, what is criteria? What does it mean to you?
Set of standards.
Yeah. So just to repeat that, a set of standards that must be fulfilled. And generally the way we look at it is to say, what is your country's values? And every country has different values, but what does your Ministry of Health, your minister, your stakeholders, your public say are important to us to set our interventions? What are our country's priorities? And in most cases, they will say that cost effectiveness is very important. But then they might also say things like hard to read donations or financial replication. And ideally, you want to set that up front so that you are making decisions across interventions by a similar standard and saying, okay, we look at the criteria for all of these interventions that we've decided. So why do we need explicit decision criteria? And I think it's important to emphasize explicit, because sometimes you make decisions, but you're not very clear about why you made the decision. If your partner, husband or wife said, why did you buy this car? You would say, oh, it's blue or it's black. But no, you might be going, actually, it's because it was cheaper than the other one, or it's more efficient, or it's faster because I'm always late to work. So you need this decision criteria, and the advisory committee who makes those decisions or recommendations will say, this is what we've used to include or exclude a intervention. And don't worry too much now about logging on. We'll get to that in a bit. But what does that country aim to achieve with its services? So it could be maximizing population health, taking care of vulnerable groups, and these various criteria play a role. So in this example, we have 3 interventions, and they are HIV medication, open heart surgery, and a vaccination. Now, how do we make decisions given that we've got 3 extremely different interventions? One targets one specific group, or each one targets a different specific type of group. So there are some principles when it comes to setting health benefit packages, and you might have seen that there's some guidance from WHO, and they say, well, these are 6 types of criteria or values that you could be thinking about. And it's cost effectiveness, avoidable burden of disease, equity and priority to the worst for, financial risk protection, that comes up often when we're thinking about UHC, budget impacts. Your finance people, your treasury is definitely interested in what is the impact on our budgets. And feasibility is one thing to say, let's do it, but actually, can you roll it out? So what is cost effectiveness? I'll just touch on it very lightly because we're at a health economics conference. So I assume that some people have a general appreciation for it. But essentially, you want to know, is something giving better value compared to something else that has a similar price? So I'm just going to jump to the example because that's the easiest way to explain it. Service A, you spend $100,000 to save 100 lives. Service B, there's $100,000 to save 200 lives. No points to guessing which one you choose, but the more cost-effective one would be the one to save 200 lives using the same amount of money. Everyone agree? Okay. But now think about that in this situation. What happens if in service A you're spending $100,000 to save 100 lives of children through DPC vaccination of children versus service B spending $100,000 to save 200 lives by fall prevention among elderly. So if you're in the room, so firstly, which intervention is more cost effective? Service A or service B? So put up your hand for service A, put up your hands for service B. B, okay. There's a few people that say B, there's some that are still stuck in service A, but which one would you choose? Okay, so who would choose service A? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 10 and a half, 10. Okay, it's about 10 people. Who would choose service B? So the rest of you just abstain. Anyone want to choose service B? Okay, so not necessarily unanimous, but most people are choosing the intervention that is less cost effective. Does anyone want to say why they're choosing the intervention less cost effective?
I would think about it in terms of life years, rather than lives. And so being children, they have a much longer lifespan and very likely to be twice as many life, more than twice as many life.
Yeah, okay, so we're getting more into the economics thinking of things. But essentially now you're starting to think about what appeals to you personally. And it might be age, and where it does get interesting is if you're asking different countries with different nationalities, because then your values really come into play. So I'll try to go through these a bit quicker because it's a few to get to. Burden of disease. Donald's really started to mention this, but service A is a cancer that causes 10 people to die, and service B is a cancer that causes 1,000 people to die. You might be targeting which is the one that has the greatest burden of disease in your population. And IHME has data for different countries in terms of what is the greatest burden of disease in terms of disease. Some countries have high traffic incidents, some countries have high HIV, some have high diarrhea. So you might want to prioritize based on burden of disease. Equity. This is becoming more and more important. And there are a couple of sessions here this week which think about, ask us to think about equity. So here you might want to give extra value to services that target the worst for those with severe health states or a low socioeconomic status, or those that have been previously neglected. And some countries interpret this slightly differently in that they would give extra value to services that target vulnerable groups such as pregnant women. There's a few countries I work in that will say, if you're pregnant, actually you don't need to pay for services. You really want pregnant women to access services. So they're exempt from music fees. Or you might want intervention specifically included because they are pregnant. So you need to define at your country level who are the most. Budget impact, fairly straightforward. What is the cost of the intervention? How many people is that going to impact? What is your budget? Is doing this intervention going to take half of your budget? Is doing this intervention only going to take 1% of your budget? You could think of it in the coronavirus vaccination. It's not a very expensive vaccination, but you have to apply it at the population level. So the budget impact is fairly heavy. But then there could be something that only affects a small number of people and it's very expensive. There could be similar budget impacts. Feasibility. If you're rolling out an intervention at a country level, is it actually feasible to do? And there are a couple of topical ones, Do you have enough doctors or nurses to initiate this? Is it accepted by the public? Do you have the equipment to be rolling out that intervention? It's one thing to say we should do CT scans for everyone that comes through the door, but if you don't have any CT machines, it's not particularly feasible. So there are multiple criteria, and there are a much longer list out there, and there's literature that's published that goes through different types of criteria. And there are analysis in terms of what different country uses, but we're just trying to keep it fairly standardized and just give you a few to think about here. But someone mentioned multiple MCDA, multiple criteria decision analysis. These are different criteria that you're going to have to grapple with and deal with trade-offs. And for every service, there are arguments that can be used to include or exclude them. And those arguments do sometimes conflict, and that's where you need to deliberate it in a committee meeting. And we will, in a later phase, part of the exercise, it's up to you to sit and debate those criteria. So thinking about the selection of decision criteria, generally it's standard to say, let's consider cost effectiveness, and in our exercise, we've given you the cost effectiveness criteria, but we want you to choose 2 additional decision criteria. So we will provide you evidence on cost effectiveness, as well as budget impacts and avoidable burden of disease. And they just know that it's the quantity of burden of disease that will be avoided, and not the total, but the total burden of disease. But we'd like you in your groups to think about what criteria is matching to you or your country that you as a group believes to be the most important to consider when prioritizing health services. So it's now a good time for them to make some of the academy. So let me just answer maybe 2 questions. Yeah, so this statement was a bit, I think.
Thank you so much for the next presentation. So, it's pretty much what we have been doing in the last 2 years. The one, the challenge which I want to hear from you is, how do you work this training? So now you prioritize with cost effectiveness, you prioritize with other criteria, and then bring it up to streets.
That's the next. Okay, that's in 10 minutes.
Okay.
Thanks. Does anyone else have any other?
Thank you for the nice presentation. I don't think that my favorite was the next session though. Anticipations that like the purpose of cost effectiveness is more benefit maximization is available source. And what we mean by cost effectiveness is like reducing the burden of disease with what you have. And in this we have seen the potential reduction of burden of disease that might get it before that intervention. But I believe that cost effectiveness is already responding to that. Why should we have like this way of as another additional criteria?
Yeah, that's why sometimes countries do consider criteria that partially overlap. And it's was the case in Pakistan, because they use affordable government disease and cost effectiveness. Because that was considered on itself to be important piece of information. We could have said we do affordable government disease and we do at cost, and we forget about cost effectiveness. But then people said, no, we still want that cost effectiveness. So we provided clear instructions to the advisory committee and technical working groups like please consider, be aware, it's overlapping, and it's still you may want to consider these 2 pieces of information in parallel. But it's not perfect. That's right. It's often this kind of work is often trying to maneuver between what's surface and what's technical and what people wish to do. Maybe small groups.
Okay, so what we need to do is form groups of 3, 4, or 5. So I don't know if you'll just bear with me while we try and allocate some groups. Or if you want to huddle together. Should I, you want to huddle together or how is it going to work there? Group. No, we'll get to another one, but before we get a group, you can kind of get to you two in the front. And then 3 here, is that right? And then 3 here, is that okay? Okay. And then so if you could for 8 to 10 minutes, just agree on 2 criteria that you would want to include over and above. You already have cost effectiveness, you already have support or burden of fees, and you already have budget impact. So now you need to come up with 2 criteria that you would want to include over and above that. So I'll count for 8 minutes.
Yeah. Has it?
Question pop up. I heard a ping.
Oh, sorry, that's just like,
Oh, okay. But have any questions come up? Do you know?
no,
Okay,
not yet.
because I did see a hand and then
Oh, yeah, people were just waving, just
Oh,
that they are
I
listening.
sent a message to say if you've got a question. Just...
Oh, but I mean, they can speak though.
Oh, okay.
If they speak, it'll come through the speakers. So, welcome.
Yeah.
No, it's not possible.
Somebody asked about the question, how do you integrate that?
I've also got handouts. I'm also. No, no problem. It can go out. Yeah, no, that's different. But that's not, that's a different way. So I think, yeah, no, I think it's saying that when they go for this, they say like one criteria that they follow, in this.
So can actually grab it.
What is this? And more about, isn't that more about how the scenes, not about, it's a lot, yes.
Government is not always. Yeah, I mean, what I would say is
Cannot bring it to us, and we said you can't hit the balance for a while. And I bring it to us.
Back up, yeah. So maybe just then you can spend another minute explaining what criteria is. So criteria is something that would apply across diseases, across interventions, and it links to your, maybe your country's value framework. Trying to do interventions that are most effective, trying to do interventions that have the most reaching people, maybe interventions that target specific groups. Okay, so you might be thinking about HIV, but actually the criteria you use in HIV might be similar to that in diabetes. And the reason that deliberation is important is because you might say, actually, when we do our HIV analysis, something that's important to us as a country, and in South Africa's case, it's for sex workers, we want to prioritize that intervention because it doesn't get picked up by some of our criteria. So that's why these discussions take place. But just think about criteria as something that will apply to all your interventions. And then I've given you 5 or 6 examples, and there could be other examples of criteria. There was a country that said, we want to prioritize interventions where we can locally make pharmaceuticals. Something like that. Okay, so locally made products, locally made pharmaceuticals could also be another criteria. We're going to go to the next step in terms of the exercise, which is assessment.
It's okay with the Good. Just to add one sentence on the decision criteria. You haven't explained the criteria that are generic across all diseases and all services. Countries typically have 5 or 6 generic decision criteria. And then, of course, you've got specific considerations for specific services. For example, for PrEP, you may think about own responsibility in some countries. And that's not a generic criteria, but it still will come up in discussion of that service. So in the Netherlands, we make a distinction between generic criteria and context-specific considerations, as we call it. This as our mind. Then we come to your topic, appraisal. So once you have all these decision criteria, how do you make sense of it in a meeting? This is called appraisal, or this is called prioritization. It's similar wording. Okay. So what is appraisal? It's the interpretation of the results of the assessment. So the results, the evidence on cost effectiveness, on burden of disease, on equity, if you wish, to develop recommendations on the design of the package. And this is about a meeting with stakeholders when you have the evidence on the table, right? It's inherently complex and a value-laden process because one needs to make social judgments on the importance of criteria. Do you think cost effectiveness is more important or financial risk protection, for example? We had discussions on oncology in Rwanda, and people said, we have very expensive cancer services. Hospital treatments, they should be covered, because otherwise you push people into poverty. Other people in the committee said, no, but we should not have them in a package, because they are not cost effective. These hospital-based treatment services. So for one criteria you would like to have it in, for the other one you would not like to have it in. So this is getting very complex because you have different social judgments on the importance of decision criteria and by different stakeholders. And you have vested stakeholder interest. Because the oncologist in Rwanda said, we don't want to let go on the MRIs that we have at the moment. Maybe it's not cost effective, maybe it's not that's useful in addition to what we have, but we don't want to downgrade what we have now. I would reason the same if I do plus, one needs to make scientific judgments. Because we talk about cost-effective data, but we all know it's often quite weak and partial. And what do you do in the absence of cost-effectiveness evidence, or in the absence of evidence on effectiveness? So, an advisory committee needs to approach that considers the trade-offs in the criteria, allowing for the stakeholders to contribute, consider opportunity cost. If you do A, you don't do B, and that's an element that needs to be made explicit during the meetings, because otherwise it's so easy to say yes to anything, and you end up with the very same long list of services. And it needs to be systematic because you like every service to be considered in the same manner, and transparent because you like the stakeholders and the public to understand and to accept in a way what has been decided. The starting point of any appraisal is what can be called a performance matrix. It is also a table that you get in 50 minutes. It's basically a listing of services on the right hand side. And we want biology, pneumonia, etc. And then you see the different criteria as goals. Right? So this is typically the starting point of an appraisal meeting. And this is what the committee has in front of. Then there are 3 ways to deal with this information. I feel like on paper, it's called the use of behavioral decision analysis for reimbursement decisions. It's a bit about my background. I worked for like 10 years MCDA, qualitative MCDA. Then the economist told me, Rob, you do a very wrong thing because you know opportunity cost. Emphasis said, Rob, you do a very bad thing because you can't put everything in numbers. So I was moved away by headlines. I thought, let's organize my thoughts. And with like 20 MCDA and HTA experts, we wrote this paper to bring some clarity to the discussion. And in the paper, we describe 3 ways on how to interpret the evidence. And I think I didn't have any, how do you say this, initial thoughts on what would come out. But let's go with what's basically I was objective to what would come out. I was not defensive of NCDA. There's a qualitative approach, a quantitative approach, usually referred to as MCDA, and there was a decisions rule or decision rules. So the first option is a qualitative approach, and that's very simple. An advisory committee deliberates on the presented evidence without any further structure. So you can look at your criteria, and when it's about 4 interventions, it's still doable. The benefit of this approach compared to not having any structure is that use of explicit criteria is a step forward compared to use of implicit criteria. But some countries do not use any of this criteria. So this already a bit better because we have the criteria being mentioned. A downside is risk of cognitive overload if it's more than 4 or 5 services. And if you do a whole package review, like in Pakistan, we were talking about 150 services, you can't expect a committee to do all this at the same time. And you have the risk of governance. The people in your committee have a strong voice, it easily dominates others. Right? So this could be a starting point for countries to work on the evidence, but it may not be optimal. A second approach is the quantitative approach. It's typically the multi-criteria decision analysis. We have the same matrix here, the simple reporting of the evidence on criteria and service, but then it is translated into scores. As follows: the scores, rates, and total score is being calculated. What you do is 3 steps. Firstly, you transform these numbers into a score in zero numbers, right? And you do the same for these, for this evidence, for this evidence, and for this evidence. So if it performs well on a certain intervention, For example, $20 per value, or $300 1 year, you give the score of 100. Yeah. If it does not perform well, inpatient care, schizophrenia, $2,000 per value, you give the score of 0. So you divide your interventions between 0 and 100. You do it also for the second criterion, severity of disease. So if you have a preference to treat a severe disease, like ventilator treatment in 78, you give a score of 100, and if it does not treat a severe disease, simple fractures, you get a score of 25. It's a bit arbitrary in this example. This could be 0, but just to show you the logic. Same for disease of the core. If we start with a disease of the core, which may be a preference in a country, you give a score of 100, otherwise it's score of 0. So this is the first step. So you score the services on the different criteria. So you can compare apples with apples. Right? The second step is you apply weights to the different criteria. In blue, you apply weights. These are the weights. So on the basis of a survey or interviews with your committee members, you ask how important do you find these criteria? And you may ask them to divide 100 points between these 4 criteria. And then they say, yeah, I find most quite important. Equally as disease before, with age, I don't find that important. And this one, also 10%. Also arbitrary figures, right? That's the second step. The third step is to multiply the scores with the weights to develop an overall score. So the 70 is calculated as 50 times 40% is 20, 100 times 10% is 10, 100 times 40% is 40, 0 times 10 is 0. So it's 20 plus 10 is 40, 70. Everybody follows me? Good. What do you think? Is it useful? Yeah, what would be the plus of this approach? Transparent. Yeah. Any downsides of this approach?
Might be the particular structural form of an additive function.
Yeah.
And there could be other functions.
Sure.
There is some complementarity or
Yeah.
one depends on the other, then
Yeah.
then
There could be-
additive will not be appropriate.
There could be interaction between the different criteria. It could be much more complex, but this is the basic problem. Why do you think I was moved away by the ethicist when I was presenting quantitative HTA? He didn't like this, what I was doing. Why? He- Yeah, you don't take into account distribution. I could have another criteria distribution. What they said is, well, you cannot cover everything in numbers. There are criteria like own responsibility, which is not easy to quantify. So therefore, how would you consider those criteria, non-quantifiable? What do you think the economists, why they are critical on what I do? Yes.
I think having this like structure and because we do not only use quantitative but criteria, so we have different criteria for different dimensions that we have to it's important to have this criteria decision analysis because we don't only have one dimension. We have measure this dimension and we need to bring them to there are the ones that having this is very important. But what we need to take care of is by, for example, the issue that I raised earlier, where we may be like counting things double.
Indeed.
Where we might be like doing something which is methodologically not founded. So like we need to take care of each metrics that considering in the non-psychological analysis. But I think it's very important to.
Yeah. So this was one of the criticisms is if you include cost and cost effectiveness, you're double counting. The other criticism, this was more fundamental, especially by the economists from the University of York, they said you have cost effectiveness as one of the criteria. And by this, you basically provide misleading results. And I'm going to try to explain it. It's a difficult argument. Let me try to explain it to you in 1 or 2 minutes. They say the moment you put cost or cost effectiveness as one of the criteria, you make a mistake because the criteria should basically you should optimize the criteria compared to the cost. So the cost should be outside your value framework, so to say. Because if you ask somebody to put a weight on cost or cost effectiveness, you implicitly ask the person to make a judgment on how important is cerebral disease compared to cost, how important are health effects compared to cost. And you implicitly ask them to estimate a cost effectiveness threshold. And nobody knows what a cost effectiveness threshold for a country should be. That's an empirical estimate. Well, I think that's very difficult to judge for an individual. So by the moment you include cost or cost effectiveness as a criterion, you go wrong on your opportunity cost argument. You make a big mistake. What you could do is to remove cost and cost effectiveness from this framework, to take it outside, try to optimize these 3 criteria, and then compare it to the cost. And then you have a ratio like cost of overall score, which is a bit funny. And you cannot get a threshold figure on cost of overall score. So this is the dead end. If you ask me, and with me 20 people together with me who wrote this paper. It's a difficult argument. Please come back to me or read this paper. And I will show you. If you'd like to know more about it, I'm not going to spend more time on quantitative HTA. No?
Yeah,
Because we are busy.
I just wanted to follow up on that question. Once you remove the cost of value function, then, okay, I just wanted to follow up on that question.
Yeah.
I think it's a good aspect that you guys brought it up in your paper. So at what point do you bring back cost and is it in the lead table at the very end?
There's a third option. I'm going to present a third approach, for which is the approach that most countries take. So, but I realize that many countries, they have an intuitive interest in this approach. You haven't told me, don't present about multiple criteria, because it's such a difficult topic, but I think it's good because intuitively people like it, but it's conceptually easy to make a mistake. So let me move on. So this is a summary where we went through maybe more or less the different points. So then we come to a third approach, which is more promising, and which many countries use, including Pakistan, and that's using a decision tree. And also the UK and the Netherlands, established HTA agencies, is using this decision tree as an alternative to a qualitative or a purely quantitative approach. What it is basically asking a simple set of questions, and it guides a committee through the appraisal process. So the first question is this service, is it safe and effective? No, do not reimburse. Yes, you go to the next question, the next stage. Is it cost effective? Then you can have a distinction between the very cost effective services, the moderately cost effective, but those that are not cost effective. Then you go to the, you don't do anything yet on exclusion or inclusion. Then you go to the second step, the third step, are there special circumstances? Are there criteria that play a role for which you change this initial order of priority of the intervention? When you look at cost effectiveness, it's very cost effective. Are there any criteria that would influence that initial conclusion on cost effectiveness? No, then we say it's a high priority. If you have a service that's not cost effective, like palliative care in some instances for cancers, are there special circumstances for this service that still makes it a high priority? Maybe yes, because that cancer can be a very severe condition, which would make it a high or a medium priority. So what happens in this box is basically the deliberation on the other criteria that may affect your initial view on whether something should be a priority on the basis of cost effectiveness alone. Are you with me? So you make an initial classification on cost effectiveness, then you enter the deliberation, and per service you're asking, are there any special circumstances? Are there other criteria that have such an impact on that service for which we change the color of that service, not being a high priority, not being a green one that you like to include, but maybe it turns out to be a low priority, like Yaka in the Netherlands. It's very cost effective. But other people say, should it be in the package or not? Maybe it's on responsibility, and it's cheap, people can pay for themselves. So it becomes a low priority. So the beauty of this stepwise approach is the first have consideration and cost effectiveness, and then you take into account the other criteria. So the committee can then classify services according to high priorities, medium, and low priorities, and then look whether it's within the budget. Right? So they may have out of 100 services in Pakistan, they have like 70 would be high priority, 70 greens. Do the 70 greens fit within the budget? Or do we need to be tight in terms of what we call high priorities and reduce the set of green interventions to 60 that would fall within the budget? So this is a way to combine cost effectiveness, keep the notion of opportunity cost, while also taking into account the other criteria. So what you do here is, like I said, deliberation on the basis of service deliberation. You can do this on the basis of evidence sheets. This is an example of an evidence sheet that we use in Pakistan, in Liberia, that we use in Rwanda. It's a simple sheet that people in the committee have in front of them, and summarizes the information on the cost effectiveness and on other criteria. And we tell people, okay, look at cost effectiveness. This is an intervention that is cost effective. So initially it's a high priority, it's green. On the basis of all the other evidence, we make a recommendation whether eventually it's a high priority, medium priority, or a low priority. And they come up with a long list of 60 or 70 services, and you go through the same exercise for 10 services with a classification of the service in terms of low, medium, or high priority. This is an example, somebody working in the Rwanda. This is an explanation form, and here you see the service evidence sheet, which is basically a summary of all the evidence on the area. A few comments. Budget is sometimes known, somehow known for the whole package review. Well, it's spending like $10 per capita. If it's about the whole health expenditure, can be reconstructed on the basis of capital spending for partial package review, like for the cancers in Rwanda. We looked at it for the being spent now, or it can be normative. Like in Rwanda, from primary healthcare, it's going to be a package for $7 to $8 per capita. These tasks can be split between technical working groups and a national advisory committee. Typically, in the countries where I'm working, we say this initial phase is going to be done by a technical working group. Because they know very well about the disease. You cannot ask from a national advisory committee, it's like 8 or 10 people, to be knowledgeable about all the different disease areas. So they invite technical working groups to do this work on the different classes of diseases, clinical disease, non-clinical disease, like you're going to do, and then provide recommendations to a national advisory committee on the whole package. We're going to consolidate everything. These decisions, we do not reimburse the evaluated decisions, are often not black and white decisions, but it's very difficult to remove something completely. It's often to reduce coverage, increase co-payment, or conditional reimbursement when pharmaceutical companies would reduce price levels. I'm going to finish with a number of images from work in Rwanda. So these are discussions in the technical working group on oncology. You see a voting mechanism in a technical working group on which services are high, medium, or low priority. So on the basis of cost effectiveness plus on the other criteria. This is then followed up by a National Advisory Committee last December, where all these recommendations from the oncologists will be interpreted within the budget constraints. This is the work in Liberia. You see the same voting mechanism. You see the evidence sheet. This is a small video, 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Yes, we do
So it's all about prioritize. So summary, I've shown you 3 approaches. Common denominator is always deliberate, right? If you do quantitative MCDA, there is a tendency for committees to stick to it, but that can also only be the starting point, right? Always deliberate. Qualitative analysis can be a starting point for starting HTA values. Quantitative analysis has conceptual flaws, so I would personally not recommend it to use. Decision tree seems the way forward. Established HTA agencies in the UK levels there's no way to use it. Other countries are starting to use it. So that would be a consideration for you to think about applying that approach. That's it. Any questions? Short questions before we go to the group exercise? Yes, we've been looking at the warning. I see that it's right so.
I think I'll go back to that slide, which shows the. Yeah, so. Deciding we don't think
I just looked it up on the
by itself.
Master.
Was one validating.
He's an agent. You don't have
Some trade discussion. Define that by itself is one challenge. But my question is, I mean, so if you group, at the end, you have a group of diseases which you call in high priority, medium priority, and low priority. Yeah? But so when you compare with the total now, especially in a scenario where you are prioritizing a lot of diseases at a time, it's not like when you want to add one intervention in a set of factors, but when you do a lot of interventions, then defining the line level, the lead, I mean, like where you will credit, will be very difficult.
Yes,
because many of them will fall in one.
Yeah, a brief response is every country has the same problem because the technical working groups they propose too many high priorities. So then the next step for the National Advisory Committee is to reconcile all these recommendations and basically maybe go back to the technical working groups and tell them you need to reduce the number of high priorities. Or they make decisions themselves, as National Advisory Committee. They may say, we're going to free up budgets with increasing the level of co-payment for some services. Or we could be not increasing coverage to that extent. So we free up budget for further services. So then the companies will play with the 3 dimensions of the queue, not only about adding more services, but also thinking about reduce coverage, increase coverage for payment. Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna jump in now, but there's limited sandwiches there. If you've got other questions, we can answer them in the break. Before you go, please can you try and log on if you have a laptop? It's a little bit easier to do this on a laptop. It's case sensitive, so CT for Cape Town 2023 EDP. And like I said, it's bit.ly/CT 2023 EDP. Each of you will be assigned a specific disease area. There are 3 non-communicable diseases, communicable diseases, and RMCH you can choose. So before you leave, let me give you one of these sheets. Make sure you can log on. Please be back here at 3 o'clock. Well, yeah, we work at 3 o'clock. And we're going to go into the group work. So if you want to start discussing it with your groups and go over 10 minutes or so.
But basically, what you can do is grab your lunch. If you like, you can start working after you have your lunch or your coffee. Or you can come back at 3 o'clock and start working as a group. And you've got like 45 minutes to work on this assignment. Okay.
Can you just give you a group of what you
No, I'm not sure.
You have preference of communicable diseases, it's now you have to actually do the work. You need to choose the interventions. Based on the criteria.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Going to Yeah, but one study, I think reading, I find it, having it. Another way of saying it. Not doing, not on, because actually, it's very difficult when you go, you work on the end of the videos. And then actually, there is, people that tend to pass the you might be out there. And the experience, we will make a decision. And the, yeah, look at the, I mean, you talk about service to the, it's probably about it's about all these ones to do this, and so if you go take on questions, people don't need it because they and it's risky, but airport, that's not really the trouble with it all. No, I don't know, how much really not nice for that's the biggest risk of podcast. And yeah, yeah. What it, yeah. And then you have the cost. Yeah.
I had to listen to the audio myself. That's terrible.
What audio from that side?
No, if you dial into the link and you listen to it,
Yeah.
it's really not clear. Someone heard to say that it's not clear. There was a comment. I tried both mics. It's just not clear.
Clear enough. So they can't hear you. So we have a technical team that can monetize.
Yeah.
So they will
listen in and see it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's very.
Is it too loud?
It's just. It's like.
Oh, okay. Got you.
Yeah. It's good if you just listen in and.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, we did publish. Yes. Like I said, the paper, yeah, according to some, and then other people, when they choose the interface for still, I think, countries, the key reminders of us, for which you could do, they still have this positive, yes, you can see this as a starting point only, and that makes sure for this very well drawn delivery problems. Actually, described. And if it's on discussing these results, that's a really practical thing, or do we still want to move the inpatient care to schizophrenia? We still want to move this up. Because now it's quite close. It's anything, so it's still the option. With that, you need to have a check with the delivery. And what I saw, figure that we do studies. This is often the endpoints of studies. So they don't deliver, don't, yeah, and there's a risk, and they go with this kind of. Yeah. Yeah, come back to me. We can discuss the reduction. I'm glad to say because it is the other interest. Yeah, so what you work on it? Yeah, most of yeah, most of us now this he really wants cost effectiveness. We're kind of like having a discussion about cost effectiveness. Yeah, so remove cost effectiveness from the very much. Okay, it is. This, yeah, for scoring ways. You are costs in the body. Okay, which is for example, what about how we still are cost effective. Yeah. Good. You work on purpose. Because then what you have, you then you've got your cost effectiveness here, but then you've got your value. Then the question is, you want to be added, maybe it's fine. But then you need to say, we accept all cost effectiveness, this is how, then it becomes quite formulaic again. Or just a rush, then a decision. Yeah. Others. But they've got the ECPs and in Ghana and Nepal, yeah, and my also the DCEs, policymakers don't like it because it's a black box. And they say, what is the DCE? And this is one thing they understand. It's difficult. They're not able to do the decision. That's something. Yeah, and what you can answer to this is indeed this list of material with the people need involved. One service, you can say people have bought some Cs, talked about the feasibility, is the room to do, and you know, for many services, in Pakistan and area, we found that for many it's clear, it's high priority, and it's really the case when this has a low cost effectiveness. And then you still want to include it in the package. And for those, that's important. The targets of a renewable group, it's like a brand name. And these are the ones that you really want to yeah. And so we have to follow up on this. Because it's after so many years of thinking about the MCA, let's see who we were. And there's no much. Yeah, it's like what? Yeah. Because I was.
Beef. Hello everyone. So this from the second or first NCD group. So our decision criteria, we're looking at the cost effectiveness. We're looking at the quality of the cost effectiveness evidence, burden of disease avoidable by health service, and feasibility. We were thinking about equity, but there was a lot of discussion on how to define it, and because of time, we dropped that. So we use the analysis with decision rules. Next slide, please.
Yes, I can.
Yes, so looking at the table, those are the list of interventions we wanted to reimburse. And so we went through the first time and we had extra money. So we decided, so we had 0.2 left from the budget. So we decided to reimburse the first one in addition to the others that had gone through the criteria. So the first one didn't actually meet our criteria when we went through it systematically, but just because it was the only one we could afford with the budget available, we decided to reimburse it rather than just leave the money, you know, just lying there. Yeah, so
thank you. Yeah, Mariam, you like to respond? Or yes, please. Some observations.
Yeah, so very quickly, I'm just looking at this, and they had a very nice discussion within the group. So that was interesting. I think they were discussing about feasibility. So they were right on track that they thought about feasibility as a provider side. So feasibility, if the health system is ready enough to implement this intervention or not. So that's important. And then they said that equity, they were not sure about equity. I think if we look at the bigger, obviously at this point in time, all of you do not have the other information at hand, right? You do not know the level of care at which the intervention will be applied. So obviously each level of care has its own expenditures, has its own budget. So that's different. So you do not have that kind of information right now. But from the information, what you have and the background you have at hand, it's a low and middle income country. And here you have 1/3 of the population is below poverty line with a very high fertility rate and so on and so forth. So for that, this philosophy of DCP3 and development of essential package of health services is to provide public financing. So if you are putting any intervention into the package, it's supposed to be provided by the state. It's the responsibility of the state to provide that intervention. So obviously it's going to, you know, cater to the equity issue. So in equity, you can think about, so for instance, in RMNCH, it's very, very simple. You're talking about women and children. But then there are other diseases which are in specific pockets. So for instance, in Pakistan, HIV would be there in a specific pocket like IDUs and transgenders and so on and so forth. So it's a community that's vulnerable and that has least access to care. So, you know, you put that kind of intervention. Similarly, when you are talking about these interventions, the diabetes and hypertension, if you were specifically talk about NCD, so you are missing out on a lot of people who might be diabetic and hypertensive and who have silent cardiac conditions, and you do not diagnose them because you do not screen them. And you know, so those kind of interventions are very, very important, and they answer to your equity issues. Yeah. So I think equity plays an important role there. Yeah. I think for the interventions, we'll pick up on other.
Yeah, nice. One question to you as a group is, you said you use a decision tree or decision analysis. How did you move from looking at those criteria, one extra criteria? How did you come to your recommendations or to your decisions? Did you look at these are high priorities, medium priority, low priorities? And did everything that's reimbursed was green or was a high priority? That's the logic. And you didn't have too many high priorities, because that's what I saw in other groups, having too many high priorities and then needing to reduce the number of green interventions again. So you were fine with the first effort. You were having a neat selection of high priorities that match your budget. Good. Okay, you had some extra money left. So the top intervention was a medium priority intervention. Okay, that's nice. Good. Any comment from others on this presentation?
We should say the comment, but rather I put it as a question. So if we see on this process, interventions which are highly cost effective are decided to be not reimbursed, and interventions which are less cost effective ended up being reimbursed. Okay, so my question on this process, I'm not questioning you, I'm questioning the criteria, like the decision tree criteria. Like, yes, it will lead you to take out, I mean, like, not to consider, I don't know how to put it, but to leave the cost effectiveness as a criteria. Because now if you see, like, for example, intervention 8 and 10, they are highly cost effective interventions, but because they are low feasibility as per the criteria, it was decided to be not reimbursed. But an intervention which is low, I mean, like, which is less cost effective, the second one, because they said it is a medium feasibility, it became priority. So that part is which I'm missing. Like, we are leaving one big criteria because of an added, I mean, like a criteria which we use just to decide on.
Yeah, so this is really very interesting, and they were actually having this discussion within the group, and this is very close to what the real thing happened. So cost effectiveness this is a health economics conference, so everybody's understands this. But if you go to you have stakeholders at the table, not all of them are economists. So you have very less time to make them understand, cost effectiveness is value for money, maximum health gains, impact, so on and so forth. But still, it's not something that they know and they'll put it on the back of their head. So that's just to be on the lighter side. But for this group, what happened was that they thought about the feasibility of the intervention from the supply side. And in Pakistan, the top criterion was feasibility. That came out to be feasibility, because they had all this evidence in front of them, the evidence sheets that Rob showed you, they were there, but then the feasibility was there. So they were saying that, this intervention is not feasible. So what we did in the end was that, taking your point that this intervention is cost effective, but why are we not putting it in? So we did the immediate implementation and implementation within 1 to 2 years. So the immediate implementation would be those interventions for which our health system is ready to start right now, or maybe those interventions are already there in the system, but we have to provide them universally, sort of. So yeah, so that was the point.
Then I propose we go to the second group. Could you put up the second group is, let me see how it's called. This one is called. That's one. Yeah. We are having the RMNHCH group, which is, it's you. Please. Briefly, please.
Thank you. I don't know if it is fortunately or unfortunately, we are all from Ethiopia. So what we used as a decision criteria, just omit the FRP. So we just added equity as a criteria, and we chose the decision tree as a MSD8 type. We can go to 2 slides, next. Yeah. So what we did was we first prioritized based on cost effectiveness. So we divided them as high, medium, and low. I mean, like, it was a given information. And then we added a criteria, which is equity. So because we don't know a lot about Pakistan, what we did is we just did it for Ethiopia. So interventions which affect people in the rural area, so we use geography as equity factor here. And then, so people intervene. So for example, management of newborn infections is common, or it specifically affects, or it affects more the people in the rural area or in a distant setup. So we gave it yes. So what we did is we gave yes, no by this way. Okay, so conditions or interventions which are going to be indifferent for geography, we gave them no. Okay, so what we did is, so those interventions which are highly cost effective, which has high burden, and then which have equity impact became the most priority. Okay, and then that way we prioritized them, and then finally we summed the budget. Okay, so it will add up. The last column on the right is cumulative adding, and then it will stop at 1.9. So the bold I'm bordering for the line 6, I think, is where we can afford. So we are left with 0.1 USD per capita, but there's no intervention. I'm like with, or probably we can take the. So this is how we did.
Good. This is how interesting group presentations. I think everybody is coming up with their own nice ideas. And look how we're impressed by numbers and colors, and how quantitative mindset we have all the time. So it's most of them, we're happy with numbers. All of us are, scientists, and we're looking at numbers, and sometimes it becomes very objective. Like he kept it in front of us, and we won't raise questions. But at the end of the day, I think the concept of decision tree is very, very important. Why? Because quantitatively, we can put up numbers, but if we think about policy formulation, now we are outside, we are on this side of the wall, the Rob showed us, okay? We're with the policymakers. In policy formulation, these numbers are what, how we tell students your relative risk of 4.4 So for instance, so these numbers on the other side of the wall has, you know, a fraction of proportion of what the whole decision takes place. So the policy formulation has its ethical, you know, considerations, has political values, and it's a very value-laden process. So sometimes there is subjectivity. We can't deny this fact. If you look at the quality of evidence pyramid, and we say that, oh, this opinion, this comes, you know, in the end, the top is the systematic reviews and the meta-analyses and the RCTs and so on and so forth. But at times in policy formulation, and I think it applies to all countries, that it becomes the evidence, though we do provide evidence, but that holds little value than what the whole process is about. So this is also, the decision tree is a process through which you go through and then make decisions. So here, I think I like this idea of equity, but just slightly touching on one or two things. So in context of Pakistan and other countries like these, where we have, you know, population explosion and very high fertility rate. So, you know, these things are happening at the public health care facilities. And we see obviously a lot of eclampsia also because the maternal mortality highest is because of postpartum hemorrhage, and this eclampsia has a very big role to play in that. So this one, but if you look at this health education, it has medium cost effectiveness. But what does this 3 stars denote? This is a high quality of evidence. So from quality of evidence, what do you understand? This value. Right? So the medium value that's coming for cost effectiveness for health education, the quality of the evidence is very high. High means it's from the local context. The rest of the evidence, since we did not have good evidence in Pakistan, we had to transfer the evidence of ICERs. But this one is from local evidence. So whenever you are talking about some evidence on cost or budget impact or ICER value in front of you, you have to know what is the quality of that evidence in front of you. So it has more value then. That's why these two criteria, you couple them together and they become stronger. And then you make choices. So I'll stop here and let's move on here.
Thanks, Mariam. I'm with you on the comments on when I saw the group working. I like it. It was a bit mechanistic because you said we look at this, and then in reality, I think at a committee meeting, it's difficult to be mechanistic because different people around the table have a different view. So they will they will provide lots of comments, and you can use this as a starting point, but I'm sure they're going to shuffle your interventions around because of their own interest. But I really like it. It's at least the idea is there to have some principles to how you structure the process. Any brief comment on this? Yes. Yeah.
I wondered whether they would want to do what Alfred did, of looking at the remaining production and seeing if there's one that we can hit. And in this case, there is the induction of labor.
Okay, indeed.
They might have kept it for.
Yeah. Yeah. So they did this one would have fit in. Yeah. Can we have the third group? So thanks for the comment. Yeah. I think your name was, it says template, reporting template, indeed. Yeah, good, there you go. Oh.
Yeah. So we looked at NCDs. Maybe we had not put the name of the interventions and the whole performance matrix. But yeah, we started out with the 5 criteria. So we used the decision tree starting. So we added 2 more criteria, equity and safety. So we kind of had like 3 levels for equity: high, disease of the poor; medium, no pattern; and low, disease of the well-off. And then we also had safety. So we came up with one assumption that if you're considering all interventions, we consider them to be safe. And then we started out with cost effectiveness, giving a higher weight to more cost-effective interventions, but not eliminating them at that particular point. And then now moving on to the next, looking at the quality of evidence, whether we can trust the cost-effectiveness estimate. And then looking at burden of disease, and then also equity. And then we ranked them. Yeah. Next slide. Yeah.
Next slide. Can you go to the next slide?
Yeah, so maybe we'd not put the name of the interventions in full, but we kind of like came up. So we had one that we gave high priority at the end of the decision tree, and then the rest were medium and low. And then now we started looking at the cost. So after high, so we looked at all mediums, and we're able to include all mediums up to 1.8 USD per capita. And then after that, so we looked at the 4 that we had ranked as low. And then we looked at the one that was the cheapest, that would be able to be included with that 0.2. So then we're able to go with the NCD1. So NCD1 was management of albumeric kidney disease. So that's how we actually arrived at our estimates and ranking of disease. Yeah, so we just use expert judgment in terms of judging equity.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. How different thoughts come here. It's very interesting. We should have one policy roundtable here also. So I think these interventions are very, very relevant because if I just talk from the Pakistani context, I'm in acute heart failure, the mass media campaigns, 1/3 of the population is smoking and unhealthy foods. And then the malnutrition, 40% plus children under 5 are stunted. So, you know, that's the level of malnutrition there. So I think, and this is very interesting that they are adding the intervention, which is cheap, but they want to put it in. So I think, yeah, leaving the money, the budget deficit, you have to add this. Now here, I want to ask about the criterion, which is safety. Because safety, so for instance, we had a few criteria which had objective values, quantitative numbers, and so on. And then we had the non-tangible ones. So for instance, equity, you know, feasibility, socioeconomic impact, the larger economic impact, and so on and so forth. So safety is safety, and we thought of safety of an intervention within the effectiveness of the intervention. And we thought that, so the assumption was that the DCP3 interventions were effective. Okay, so that was our assumption. But here, what's safety? Safety in terms of the intervention is safe?
Yes, so pretty much thinking about in terms of adverse reactions, maybe number of adverse reactions or something like that.
The intervention is safe, or the intervention is safe within the system, or within the intervention is safe.
The intervention is safe.
Intervention is safe. So if we remember the phase 1, 2, 3, 4 trials, and we see that every intervention is, you know, it comes with its already done evidence. Already there are trials, there are maybe observational studies, and so on and so forth. And then if the trials are done, so the safety and the efficacy, and then the effectiveness, all of them are done. So at this level, at a policy level, I think we will have to elaborate more on this criterion maybe. But if it's about intervention only, then it should be effective and safe already.
Oh no, we did assume that. We did assume that.
So that was the assumption that we did. So when you put that criterion, really, so that was the assumption that they were safe, and that's why we are considering them at a particular point in time. Yeah.
Regarding equity to the three already.
Yes, to the three already. So safety was there, but not really was constant for all. So kind of like they all included, they all safe, and then now start up with the other ones. Yeah. So that was the assumption.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. You didn't get this applause yet. Also, the first group didn't get applause. So also for the first group, David.
Okay, I can be really quick because we didn't even make a slide. We were too busy talking about food options and whatnot. So we started out as hardcore utilitarian technocrats, and then we're promptly uprated by Gavin. So we had to do more. So basically, I'll just talk very quickly. So the three criteria that we added was on columns G, H, and I were severity of disease, kind of defined as like really kind of disabling or kind of kills people young, that sort of thing. Equity, which we kind of framed in terms of vulnerable populations. And then financial protection, like, is it really a kind of acute, high cost sort of service that would lead to high catastrophic spending, whatever. And then we essentially just ranked everything first by cost effectiveness, sorted by cost effectiveness, and then by avoidable disease burden. And then we started moving things in and out. And so this is the final list. And then we, of course, like the other group, did the kind of cumulative cost approach. And we drew a line somewhere around row 7. And then we looked at the things below that line of the budget of $2 per capita and said, well, does this feel right for these things to be away, be out of the package? And we looked over essentially for the things that were below that, and then picked things that were attractive based on their little stars. And so moved them kind of up, and the things that were less attractive because they didn't have these X's, we moved them out. So it's sort of a kind of a decision tree light approach. And then what we ended up with is essentially everything except for the 3 red interventions. The one exception is that for RMNCH 8, severe acute malnutrition, we ran up with against a budget constraint because it was like $0.4 per capita and we were at 1.8, so we were going to go over. So we said, okay, we'll just partially implement that one this time around, go for 50% coverage, and then we'll sort of try better next time. We felt like we couldn't exclude it; it just felt too important, but it was the one that was kind of at the margin in our final exercise. So yeah, fairly technocratic, but we at least got to play with multiple criteria.
Thanks. A beautiful approach, I think. You call it technocratic, but what I hear is lots of judgments in it, because you move services up and down. You look at the interventions that were supposedly excluded, but then you thought we cannot really exclude them because they are important and people need them. So you partially include them. And I think that's what's happening in practice. It's very difficult to disinvest. So what also in Pakistan, what happens in practice is basically partially implementing interventions or implementing them in 2 or 5 years, or having a co-payment on them. So it's all kinds of ways not to have a black and white decision, but to soften that approach. So I wouldn't call it technocratic. Okay, these were the 4 groups. We're also at almost 4:30. Just a question to all of you, like, what's your take on this kind of work? Do you think was it useful for you? And what do you think, what did you learn? What did you learn about how to do the appraisal? Did you learn about different criteria? Anybody wants to say something? Okay. Yeah. Nice. That. Yeah. 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 Indeed. I think it's nicely put, and that's the overall aim of the workshop. Like we are a health economics conference, talking about cost effectiveness a lot, and this is basically showing how the other criteria can come in, not necessarily quantitative, but merely in a qualitative manner. Any last comment from anybody, please?
I think the role of value judgments, no matter which different way we try to all adopt different methods, we still had to make a judgment. So yeah, just working that out, that is still very much part of decision making and policy.
Excellent, thank you. With that, you'd like to say a final word, please? because I want to leave you at
Just to wrap up our slides, we're talking about what to do with if there's extra money. And I think you said you'd shed a little more light on that, on what the best approach is, thinking about co-payments or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Let me follow up with you individually. Is that okay?
Okay.
We have past time and I don't want to keep people longer than we promised. Just want to say that if you like to follow up on this kind of work, we are happy to work with you. You can find us on email, or you can through the app. I think you can get in touch with people. We are happy to further follow up with you, or we can write it down here. That's right. So we like, yes, please. Okay. Yeah, there's a Tuesday morning session on benefit package design in Ethiopia. So all welcome there. Maybe you're going to present your new package on RMNCH. So thanks a lot for your attendance, and wish you a very nice conference next few days.